Hi, welcome to the live event for the Robotic Vision Massive Open online course. I'm Peter Cork, I'm the instructor. It was kind of my passion over the last year or so to put together these online courses, one on robotics, it's called Introduction to Robotics, which some of you may have attended, and also the Robotic Vision MOOC, which you are all enrolled in. Both of the MOOCs are in their second running. We run robotics twice, and this is the second running of the Robotic Vision MOOC, and we intend to run them again in the first half of next year. I apologize for being pretty absent from this particular instance of the MOOC. I'm on sabbatical leave from the university, and for the last 5 months, I've been based at Oxford University, hanging out with the mobile robotics group there. So they're a pretty interesting group, actually. If you're interested in knowing what they do, Google Mobile Robotics Group Oxford, and it'll take you to their webpage, and you can see what these guys are up to. Basically, they are a pretty awesome field robotics group and doing a lot of work in mobile autonomy. That's basically self-driving vehicles, but a lot of work in vision, a lot of work in stereo vision, and also a lot of work in building fantastically rich three-dimensional maps of the world based on information from scanning laser rangefinders. So now that's kind of where I've been hanging out for these last 5 months. And for that particular period of time, I've set myself a pretty massive goal, which was to update my book called Robotics Vision and Control, which some of you might have read. I wrote the book mostly in 2009, 2010, which is quite a long time ago now, and quite a few things have changed. Technology's moved on. My interests have moved on. I've learned different things, which I think are interesting to the readership of the book. So the book is undergoing a massive rewrite, and I'm almost done. If you've got the book, you know it's a really, really thick book. So it's been a ton of work to update that, but I think the new version will be an awful lot better than the one that's out now. And hopefully that will be available sometime in the middle of next year. I've started to ship about half the revised chapters. I've shipped off to the publisher, and then they have to be typeset and proofread and proofread and proofread before the thing will finally get printed. So that's what I've been up to, and as I said, I apologize for being pretty much completely absent from the discussion forums and so on. But there's a great number of people enrolled in the MOOC, and I'm really happy about that. I believe that this meets a need that nothing else out there does. So we have some questions that students and participants in the MOOC have posted. So what I'll do is just go through the questions. If you've got any questions, please post them to the comment thread for this event, and I will do my best to answer them. So the first question is from Luis Carlos Corino Fijo, and he asks a couple of questions. One is, he says that in the first video of each lecture of the Introduction to Robotics course, you can see that I'm in a big classroom and there's a shiny green thing over my desk. What are they? Indeed, in the Introduction to Robotics course, I start each lecture with a segment that's done in a lecture theatre, and that is really just a way of trying to show that that this is a course like a university course, but it's not a particularly good environment, I think, for a MOOC or for an online course to basically video what's happening inside a lecture theatre. So we just have a brief moment with me in the lecture theatre, and then we transition to much more highly produced videos, which you will have seen in these MOOCs. So it's really just an artifact to kind of show that the MOOC is related to academic activity. As far as the shiny green thing that's over my desk, I'm not exactly sure what Lewis is referring to. There were some segments of all the MOOCs were actually filmed in my office. So there's a round table in my office, and I did quite a bit of live to camera work in that particular environment, and it was kind of a more intimate way to try and explain things or concepts, and I could actually use props and do demonstrations. That office, sadly, no longer exists. Earlier this year, my whole robotics group, we moved out of those particular set of rooms, which occupied a floor of building at my university. We got moved out to temporary accommodation, and that area was completely rebuilt. I haven't actually seen the rebuilt rooms because I'm still at Oxford, but I'll go back in December and get to see the new premises. So I can't recall what was in the office, and that office no longer exists, which is kind of interesting. An interesting thing, though, about the new offices that we have is we bought one of these beam robots, a telepresence robot, and so I've actually visited the new labs and new offices via the robot. So I'm sitting here at my desk in Oxford. There's a really nice desktop app, and I can see what the robot sees. I've got two camera views. I have a front view, which lets me talk to people, and then there's a downwards camera view, which lets me see the wheels of the robot, which is really helpful when I'm trying to steer through narrow corridors and around obstacles. So it's pretty good. I can drive the robot, and I can say hello to people and have a conversation with them, even though I'm on the other side of the planet. So that's pretty nice. So I've actually driven the robot into my new office and drove it behind the desk and looked at the view from what I would see from my new desk, but I won't actually get to visit it. Hang on, I've just gone. All right, it's a message from Ed, one of the tutors, but I'm not quite sure what he's meaning. Okay, so that's probably about as much as I can say to Lewis's question. The next question is from Shisha Shah and asks about the fact that in the course so far, we've really talked about two-dimensional image processing, but real robots need three-dimensional image processing, and that's absolutely true. Robots move in general in a three-dimensional environment, even though, say, robots might be moving just on the floor, and a floor is, a planar surface, it's two-dimensional, but the robot needs to be concerned about things that stick up above the floor, the obstacles essentially where it is unable to drive. So we do need to move from simple two-dimensional processing to three-dimensional processing, and we do that in some of the later lectures in the Vision MOOC. So we cover, in particular, a technique called stereo vision, and that's a very classic technique, if you like, in robotics, and it mimics to some extent the three-dimensional capability that we ourselves possess. So by taking images from two different cameras, which are separated by a distance, what we call the baseline, then the view from each of those cameras is slightly different. And by looking at those subtle differences between those two views, we can get some very rich information about the three-dimensional structure of the scene that we're looking at. Computationally, it is fairly intense, but these days with modern computers, we can derive three-dimensional structure from these two views pretty quickly. So we cover three-dimensional vision in some of the later lectures in the MOOC. Perhaps the simplest way you can think about this this way of recovering three-dimensional structure from two different views is simply to translate your head sideways like this. So don't rotate your head, just do a pure translation. And what you'll notice is that things that are very close to you appear to move a lot in your field of view, whereas things that are a long way away from you move less. And that's really the essence of stereo image processing. We take view from two cameras separated horizontally, and we look at this horizontal displacement of points in the scene. All right. I forgot there's a bit of Lewis's question. I might just go back to, he said, also, besides robots and programming, do I have any other hobbies? Uh, I don't have very many hobbies. I like reading. I'm a big fan of crime fiction, particularly Scandinavian crime fiction. I read a ridiculous amount of that. I also read a lot of biographies, particularly of scientists and technologists. So I have just finished reading a book about Isambard Kingdom Brunel. I'm not sure if you've heard of him, but he was a very famous, very impressive engineer in the Victorian era. He died in 1859, but he built bridges and railway lines and ships. And I've actually visited some of those in Bristol in the UK. One of his boats is there and one of his bridges is there. So, people who've been involved in the history of computing, I've also read a lot of their biographies as well. So Scandinavian crime fiction and biographies of prominent technologists are probably my biggest hobbies. Okay, so we talked about 2D and 3D image processing. Next question is from Asigo Yuka, and he asks, has anyone translated the book to another language? There was a discussion a couple of years ago about translating the book into Chinese, and I've actually lost touch with what happened in that particular project, whether it was completed or not. But I know that my publisher, which is Springer, who technically own all the words. I'm just the author. Springer, the guys who actually own the words, and they were negotiating to have it translated into Chinese, but I don't know what happened with that. And given that there's going to be a new version of the book coming out, then probably need to revisit that. He also writes that he considers to translate it. So perhaps offering to make a translation of the book into another language. I think that would be a great thing. So best thing to do would be to send me an email and we can have a discussion about making such a translation. I'm just going to, excuse me while I just rearrange some of the windows on my screen so I can see what's going on here. There's a note from Ed about other future MOOCs. So as I mentioned right at the beginning, there are two MOOCs currently available. The one is Introduction to Robotics, which is, you could perhaps consider to be very classical robotics. It's mostly about arm robotics, kinematics and dynamics, and the Robotic Vision MOOC, which talks about pretty classical image processing and touches on three-dimensional image processing and 3D reconstruction. I have plans for doing two more MOOCs. They'd be projects for 2016 and may be available very late in 2016 or early 2017. One of these would be on mobile robotics. And this is certainly, at the moment, the fastest growing area of robotics. That and humanoid robotics actually probably is the other very fast growing area of robotics at the moment. But I'm considering doing a MOOC on mobile robotics. So that would cover topics like path planning, localization, and navigation, and the sensors that are the essential sensors for mobile robots, which are odometry and laser rangefinders. The other new MOOC that I would really like to do is on what's called multi-view geometry. And it's basically about three-dimensional vision. So the emphasis of that course would be almost entirely on 3D vision, and it would be based on what we've learned, what we've covered in the first Robotic Vision MOOC. So two potentially new MOOCs, mobile robotics and multi-view geometry with a big focus on 3D vision. The other point from Ed was that what goes into designing and preparing a course like this. The first two MOOCs, I think they took me probably the best part of 18 months to prepare, and they probably took about two about 2 days a week, I think, all up. So that's a huge amount of time, way more time than I ever expected that it would have been. So given that I have presented all of this lecture material to a classroom at my university, I really thought that if I can give it to a classroom, it should be pretty easy to give it in a MOOC. But no, actually, a lot of things are very different. There was my slides that I would normally present in the lectures. They had to go through a lot of reformatting, I guess, to make them look much more beautiful than the ones are that I normally have in my class. There's also a lot of work on making sure that all the images that I used were that I had permission to use all of those images, which I don't need to do for lectures that I give at my university. And then there was a lot of work on actually narrating the sessions. It would generally take me probably a day to narrate one particular MOOC lecture. And there was a lot of work on all of the questions, and a whole lot of other things that I really underestimated. So yeah, it was a huge amount of work, but work that I was really very happy to do. It was my passion for that period, and yeah, I still have the passion to do more of them. So watch this space. Okay, next question. Sugal Yuka again. What are the up-to-date research topics in robotic vision or robotics? That's a pretty good question. If you consider what's the cutting edge of robotics, then perhaps if you may have watched the DARPA Robotic Challenge. So this was a big event earlier this year where a number of robots from a number of teams had to perform sort of a mock disaster scenario. So the robot had to drive a car, had to open some doors, had to turn some valves, had to move some cables, had to cut a hole in the wall, walk over rubble, and then walk up some stairs. So really very, very challenging set of activities. And if you're not aware of this particular challenge, then Google DARPA Robotic Challenge 2015, and you should be able to find a lot of web pages, a lot of web resources, and a bunch of videos. So the robots in this challenge were cutting edge robots. Very many of them were humanoid robots. So these are robots with 2 arms and 2 legs, technologically very advanced. But as a group, the humanoid robots probably did worse than other robots in the competition. And I think that shows that having machines that can walk over uneven terrain, that can get in and out of a car, can go up and down stairs, is still a cutting-edge research problem. And the problems are at a number of levels. I think there is a perception problem. How does the robot understand the 3-dimensional world in which it's placed? And I think there's also a control problem. How do we take the information that the sensors give us about the state of the world around the robot, and how do we convert that into the motion commands that allow the robot to do the task, to move as it needs to move, while also maintaining its stability, that is standing up and not falling over. So as ever in robotics, as it's always been, perception remains a very difficult problem. And I think also the control of robots with very, very many joints. So these humanoid robots have probably got upwards of 30 joints in their legs and arms and torso that need to be controlled, all in real time. So if you're looking for areas to study, I think this business of robot perception, how does a robot understand the world, I think is a really important one. In Australia, about a year ago, we received a significant amount of funding to establish a new research centre, which we call the Australian Centre for Robotic Vision. And the purpose of this centre is to come up with the fundamental science and engineering technology that allows robots to see, ideally as well as human beings can see. And if you think for a moment about your own sense of sight, you use it for almost everything that you do every activity that you do is guided by your visual sense. And you do this almost unconsciously. Yet, really, if you don't have a sense of vision, people who are blind, are profoundly limited in what they're able to do. So the goal of our new center is to try and give robots a sense of vision as good as humans have, but we could imagine that robots would have perhaps senses of vision that is superior to what human beings have. But certainly humans and almost all animals have eyes. I talk about this in the first robotic vision lecture, and it has evolved over time because it is such a powerful way of understanding what is around us. So I'm a big fan of vision for robotics, and I think there are a lot of really interesting research problems there. Question from Akshay Kumar. He said, why and how did I start programming? Because generally electrical engineering don't do MATLAB programming. That's a couple of good questions in there. How and why I started programming. I did electrical engineering university a long time ago, and we were taught at that time, I'm talking late 70s, we were taught Fortran, and we used some Fortran programming for circuit simulation, and we also learned C programming in the computer science unit that I did. I think these days almost all electrical engineers will learn programming in one language or another, and the issue is what would that language be? And there are lots of languages that are used, perhaps as a first computer language at university. It might be Java, it might be Python, it might be C, or C, probably unlikely to be C++, or it could be MATLAB. I know that at a lot of universities, electrical engineering students are taught MATLAB programming, and they use it really from the first year all the way through. It's a way of analyzing results from laboratory sessions, but it's also a tool that they can use to implement controllers. So if you're doing a control engineering unit, you can use MATLAB to design controllers, but also to implement them. And it's my own personal familiarity with MATLAB, the fact that we use it at my university, but also my awareness of the fact that it's very widely spread around the world, and that's the reason that we use it as a basis for all the programming in this particular MOOC. Actually, if you want to have a follow-up question on that, then please post it. Andrew McConnell says, what platforms are emerging as common standards for field deployment? And he lists a few there: Raspberry Pi, the NVIDIA Jetson, or the TX1, or BeagleBone. I think it probably depends on the level of sophistication of field deployment. If we were doing simple robots for educational purposes to demonstrate principles in a classroom, then I'd probably go with something like a BeagleBone or a Raspberry Pi, primarily because they are relatively low cost and very widely available, but they're pretty limited in the amount of computing that they could do. For a real field robot, then I think the tool of choice would probably be a generic x86 box running Linux, probably Ubuntu Linux, and running ROS. ROS is called a Robot Operating System, and if you're interested in that, just Google Robot Operating System or go to ros.org, and you can find out all about ROS. It is an amazingly complete set of tools and a communications framework for building robotic systems. So you can actually distribute the computation across a number of network computers and plug cameras into some computers and other sensors into different computers. You run computational nodes on those computers, and they communicate with each other, and you have a robot controller. A large amount of the code's already written for you, device drivers and planners and so on. So in some ways, it's just a matter of scripting, harnessing a lot of pre-written tools and getting them to work together to control your robot. ROS runs best on x86 box under Linux. There's some limited availability on other platforms. MATLAB these days has really good ROS support built in, so you can talk to other ROS nodes from inside a MATLAB completely seamlessly. Raspberry Pi and BeagleBone, as I said before, are a little bit computationally limited. So if it was a sophisticated robot with vision sensors and laser scanners, I doubt they would be up to it. The NVIDIA Jetson is an interesting piece of hardware. It is got a big GPU on there, as well as a regular CPU. And that's going to be really handy if you're going to do a lot of image processing. There's a robot project that we're working on at my university at the moment. This is an underwater robot, and its task is to seek out and cull a particularly I'm just struggling for the right word here, a type of starfish which is in plague proportions on Australia's Great Barrier Reef. So the purpose of the starfish is to swim through the water, identify these starfish, and to inject them with a toxin. And this sounds a little bit scary. You've got robots going around and killing living organisms, and yeah, it's perhaps a little bit disconcerting at first blush. We've done all the ethics approvals for this, and the starfish at the moment are being culled, injected with poisons by human divers because they are destroying huge amounts of this coral reef. So the idea of these robots is they're just going to automate what human divers are already doing. Human divers, though, are a very, very expensive resource. A human is quite limited in where they can go underwater. Generally, they can't go deeper than 18 meters. They can't stay down for very long. You need to have a ship on the surface to support the divers. So having human divers is a very expensive way to approach the problem. And the idea of this robot is to automate that, so it doesn't need support ship. It can stay underwater and basically until its battery is exhausted, which is a rather long-winded introduction to the fact that this robot has a Jetson processor on board, and we're using its GPU capability to run convolutional neural networks, which are trained to recognize this particular starfish, and can do that very, very quickly and very, very reliably. So we've trained the neural network on lots and lots of images of the starfish, all different distances and orientations. And we trained it with a whole bunch of things which are not these starfish, and developed a very, very reliable classifier. And so the Jetson is a key component of this underwater robot system. Again, if anyone's got follow-ups on any of these questions, please just post them to the comment list and I will get them. All right, we got a couple of questions actually held over from a live event that we had in the introduction to robotics MOOC, which was, I probably did this three, four months ago, and some of them are reasonably general questions, so I might just address those, and then we can wrap up. So one from Brazil, from Rodrigo Barbacovi, and he says, what's my opinion about platforms like Arduinos, Raspberry Pi, and others for starting in the robotic world? A bit similar to the question that I just answered before for Andrew. I think for people who are starting out in robotics, perhaps something like an Arduino or a Raspberry Pi is a really good choice. Easy to interface to sensors and comes at a pretty low price point. But it's not something that I'd put out into the field or put into production, but certainly really good way to get started. And in the Robotic Vision MOOC, so in the Introduction to Robotics MOOC, we have a project component, and I know some of the students are using Arduinos and Raspberry Pis to implement the simple two-joint robot that we have as the project component in that MOOC. A question from Mohammed Salah Eldin, and he says he's coming from an electrical engineering background, and what should he know about mechanical design to be a good roboticist? This is a really good question, and perhaps different people would have different ideas about this. I think to my mind, a lot of the really hard problems in robotics are really around the sensory perception, as I talked about earlier. How do we process images from cameras and use that to create control inputs to robots? So I think a lot of the big efforts in robotics these days are going to be effectively algorithmic. You need to know about algorithms. You're going to have that good math background and a strong ability to code. To get anywhere in robotics today, you have to be able to code and probably be familiar with a robotic framework like ROS. So to my mind, the mechanical aspect of robotics is not so important these days. There are a lot of good robot mechanisms out there that you can buy. You don't actually need to build them. You can build them, and I know people who are building some absolutely gorgeous robots. But to my mind, big problems where we need lots of people to be working, I think, is algorithmically on the perception side, and the mechanical strength is not so important there. And same for fundamental electrical engineering, knowledge about circuits, transistors, communications, I don't think is really that important for robotics. These are all technologies that we will just take from smart people who develop those things, people who develop computers, microprocessor chips, communication chips, Wi-Fi, all of that stuff, mechanical design, nice to design robots, wheel, leg systems. We take all of that, and then what we do is we add on top of that the capability, which is the smarts, the intelligence. Okay, I think that's about it for questions that I've got on my list here. Thank you very much for participating in this live event. If you've got any follow-up questions, post them to the MOOC discussion forums, and myself or any of the tutor team will get back to you. So I'm going to call it a day there. Thanks very much for attending, and look forward to talking to you later. Bye-bye.